Morning. My name is David Scott. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, and I'm here to welcome you to day 2 of our conference. Today our focus is on what is happening in India, what is happening particularly in Mumbai, and how Mumbai and India are trying to redevelop itself to become a vibrant Indian, to develop vibrant Indian renewable cities. So it's from an outsider's perspective, it is going to be one of the most interesting days of the conference. And of course, this afternoon, then we're taking tours out to actually see Indian Mumbai under construction and the buildings that have been built there. So I'd like to welcome this morning's speakers up onto the stage. Professor Antony Kim will be chairing the first session. So please put your hands together and welcome the speakers of the first session.
Good morning. My name is Antony Kim. I'm the chair of this morning's plenary session 2 for Remaking Mumbai. The first speaker is Mr. Gaiwat, Metropolitan Commissioner of Mumbai Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency. I'd like to welcome the last speaker, Mr. Antony Wood, Executive Director of CTBUH and also Associate Professor IIT. His title will be Remaking of Mumbai, Search for an Appropriate Skyscraper Response. Please welcome him with a big hand.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I am speaking to you this morning in the capacity of an associate professor at IIT. I just want to make that clear because it's very possible I will upset some people, colleagues in the room, and if I upset you, I want you to be clear that I'm upsetting you as a professor from IIT and not as the Executive Director of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. I want to start with a statement which I know at least some of the people in this room have heard me say before. I actually think that 95% of tall buildings in existence around the world are pretty terrible pieces of design. And I know that's a surprising statement for someone in my position, but I think we can get really excited about the engineering challenges, the engineering achievements, the economic achievements. But I'm really worried that architecture is homogenizing cities around the world. And tall buildings, I think, are the worst culprits. So we become to associate a city through its skyline. But the skylines, the buildings themselves, are transportable. And you see it. You see competitions for a skyscraper in Moscow. And a couple of years later, the unsuccessful proposals might pop up in Mumbai or Melbourne. And you know, I'm interested in the differences between cities and places, and I think every place needs to find its own appropriate response, which does not deny, in some cases, thousands of years of vernacular tradition, architectural traditions. So the vast majority of tall buildings for me fall into one of two camps. And by the way, I'm a professor at IIT, so I'm not going to stand here and criticize Mies. This was the pinnacle of modern architecture for many people, and I wouldn't disagree with it, the Seagram building in New York. However, from the minute it was built, it was hijacked. It was hijacked because it was the maximum commercial return you could get out of a tall building. And it was hijacked and it was superimposed in 1,000 places, 10,000, 100,000, lots of places around the world, because it was an extremely efficient core and clad commercial space. The second design approach, and again, I actually think this is a fantastic building, but the second design approach we've seen start to proliferate more in the past 10 years. And it's the iconic sculptural approach. It's a building which is perhaps more interesting in form, is more appealing. It's a piece of sculpture, but it's designed as a piece of sculpture. And the relationship between the building and the city is predominantly a visual one. It's a, I am beautiful, behold me. And when it exists at that level, I believe it can very easily be picked up, and again, just like to stress, not specifically talking about this building, but can be picked up and put in other places around the world. So back to my country, London, always safe for criticizing my own country a little bit, but so we see these commercial models all around the world. Canary Wharf in the East End of London, which really is just a piece of Manhattan adrift in the East End of London. For me, there is no architecture here. I'm sorry if that upsets you. It is clad commercial space. And by the way, I can afford to have this utopian view because I'm not the person that's financing it, designing it, dealing with clients, or making it stand up for engineering. So please, I realize I'm putting across a utopian view, and I have the ability to do that because of my position as a professor. Now, I spent most of my career as an architect before I moved to the council working in Asia, and this is how it's translating in Asia. It's the same. This is a cityscape in Jakarta and another in Seoul, just two places I visited. And it's the same rectilinear air-conditioned box isolated from culture with a bit of fun and games at the top and sometimes a bit of fun and games at the bottom. I mean, look at this. Look at the slide of Seoul, the scheme in the middle there, with a postmodern, neoclassical pediment. What the hell's that doing in the middle of South Korea? If it was in Rome, we could at least understand that there's a cultural link. It's not a very deep one, but there's a cultural link. But what is it doing there? Where is the cultural link with this? And I'll tell you what the link is, and you're probably all aware. The link is Western equals modern, so let's emulate Western. Let's import it. Whether it's a car, a building, or whatever it is. And I feel very strongly that we need to react against this. So what are the movements away from it? This is what I call literal cultural symbolism. It's looking to something in the culture and applying it perhaps in a literal way. It's still a rectilinear air-conditioned box, but it's in an Islamic country, so it has a mosque-type thing on the top. Is that better? I don't know. I don't have the answers. You make your own mind up. For me, at least somebody is trying to make something more local here. Tallest building in the world up to a few weeks ago. Taipei 101. In so many ways, a great building. I think it is a great building. Literal cultural symbolism. The idea of a pagoda, a distinct cultural form, extrapolated through 101 stories. Similar here, these two projects, Skidmore's Jin Mao Tower, a fantastic building, right next door to the World Financial Center in Shanghai. One, an example of literal cultural symbolism, another abstract cultural symbolism. So one, we see evocation of a pagoda. On the right-hand side, the scheme is more abstract. Com Pedersen Fox explained this project in terms of the philosophy, the Chinese philosophy, the turn from the square to the line as the building tapers up. A project that I love, and I just have to confess that I am totally schizophrenic, and I feel schizophrenic because I can get excited about any tall building project, and I think this is an incredible building. However, the architects described this building's relationship to culture about being in plan. If you look at the plan of the building, it's based on Islamic geometry. But then the geometry is extruded through 88 stories. I'm not sure that it's actually resulted in a Malaysian tower that relates to the Malaysian culture. Of course, now it's totally synonymous with Malaysia. But if it was in Chicago or Sydney, wouldn't it be synonymous with Chicago and Sydney? Now, what a lot of people don't know is just 3 or 4 miles from this building is another building which is inspired by the same plan form, done by a local architect. Same plan, more or less, without the curvy bits, but the same plan. However, it's not just a gesture in plan. It's extrapolated into 3 dimensions. I think this is a wonderful Islamic tower in Kuala Lumpur. And it has the environmental agenda because this brise solaire, this Islamic patterning on the outside, actually protects the glass behind. So that's a precursor for the project that I'm about to show. And the project I'm about to show is the result of myself and 12 students spending 2 weeks in the city this time last year, working together with the Remaking of Mumbai Federation, who treated everybody fantastically and were a great support. And we worked on an area in the C Ward and tried to find an appropriate skyscraper response. And just before I show you, just to get expectations set at the right level here, this is 12 students and 1 professor working for 3 months. It's not the whole might of an architectural office and the engineers working for 3 years. So if we didn't get this fully resolved, I hope you'll cut us a bit of slack. But one thing we did take very seriously was to come here and map an area of the C Ward and spend time with the people and do the studies. And there you see the student group with students from Rizvi and JJ College of Architecture who supported us very, very much, and some of the local people who live in the C Ward. You saw the maps from some of the presenters earlier today. The red is the C Ward. The purple is the 5 sites that we chose for the students last year. Interestingly, the blue is the site that we're doing this year. So I have 12 students in the room who are doing a similar project this year. And interestingly, the pink is the site for the India Tower, which I think a lot of you will know. So although this is not a high-rise context, as you've seen from Mayank and others, the plan is that this will be a high-rise context. Wow. That's what we created. Is it a monster? Perhaps. But I want to talk to you about the ideas behind this. I jumped to the final image so you know where we're going. Let's not keep it in suspense. But it's really important that you understand the ideas here. I mentioned yesterday, in fact, Charles Correa spoke about it. You know, the correct tall buildings, it's not about FSI, it's not about number of meters, it's about what makes sense in support facilities, amenities. You know, I'm the Executive Director of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, and I live out in a single-family home in a place called Oak Park on the edge of Chicago, with a nice garden. I have 2 children, 3 and 6 years old. I would not put them in a high-rise tower if you paid me. Because there is not the space and facilities in the majority of high-rise buildings to continue the pattern of life that we want. Social space, communal space. This happens at the street, in the gardens, in the parks, in the road. It doesn't happen in elevators and corridors. If we are serious about creating future, taller, denser cities, then we need to put all of the city up in the sky. And this is what this project looked to do. So bear with me for a second while I talk about sky bridges. Connections between buildings. It's been proposed for almost 200 years in science fiction, cinematography, and various other realms. Is it just a utopian vision? I know of at least 50 buildings around the world that have sky bridges, connections between buildings. I've seen them here in Mumbai. You know, usually just 2 buildings, 2 or 3 buildings that are connected. Building that won our award, Best Tall Building Award last year, just completed in Beijing. Not particularly tall, but 7 towers linked. And the linkage is crucial for me. You know, it seems crazy that we're making this push for vertical cities, but each building is an isolated piece of architecture with, you know, self-sustaining. We need to put the connections in. We need to bring the whole city up, not at the expense of the ground floor. If we have 50,000 people on a plot of land and we're going to make that to 500,000 on the same plot of land, then we need to put the same facilities that they had at the ground in at several levels. There are lots of other benefits. You know the Petronas Towers? That sky bridge is part of the fire strategy, fire evacuation strategy. So people can actually evacuate through the sky bridge and evacuate through the safe tower in the event of a fire. That actually resulted in them being able to omit 1 fire stair from each of those towers. 1 fire stair, 3 meters by 6 meters, 18 meters per squared meters per floor, times 2 towers, times 44 stories, because it was half height. That's a lot of money, as well as floor saving. There are lots of benefits in this. Hong Kong is a great example. Now, this is just at the first floor level or second floor level, a couple of stories up. But you can walk for several square miles in Hong Kong and in Minneapolis and in many other cities around the world without touching the ground. And sky bridges became massively discredited because of the kind of Le Corbusian, brutalist, adoption of these things at the expense of the ground floor. That's not what I'm advocating. This doesn't need to be at the expense of the ground floor. Just look at these images. Look at that. Look at the density of Hong Kong on the left there. And many other cities. Manhattan, I could have chosen many other cities. Is it really that far-fetched to think that those buildings could become linked? Look at the scheme on the right. If you can't see it, those are 3 separate towers, very typical of Hong Kong. The vacant floor halfway up is a refuge floor, part of the Hong Kong fire regulations, and the whole of China, I believe. Someone may disprove that. But what that means is, in the event of a fire, people come down and it's a staging floor, it's a temporary refuge floor, it's lots of things. I think those towers are 2 meters apart. If you just linked the refuge floors, not only do you get an alternative evacuation path, but you get a whole vacant floor there which you could bring back into use. Anyway, humour me. Back to the seaward of Mumbai. So, the first thing that we struggled with when we got into the seaward was, is this area really suitable for tall buildings at all? And a lot of yesterday we spoke about infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure, and you've heard that this morning. But nevertheless, we were committed, we were there. The student had to design a high-rise project, so we tried to do it the best that we could. We spent a lot of time in that area. The first thing we grappled with was what to do at the ground plane. And, Mayank just gave what I thought was an excellent presentation. And actually, I've spent a lot of time with Mayank in the past year, and he's an incredibly intelligent and an incredibly sincere guy. And I think we agree on most things, and virtually 95%. Personally, I agree with everything they've said in the Seaward, with the exception of the final vision. Because what concerns me is they're sweeping the city away. Where they see just problems in the Seaward, I see an area that I've never seen anywhere on this planet, fraught with problems, no question about it, but also full of opportunities. And go back to what I say before. It's been done around the world. Sweep away the city and build something new. And I think there is a way that we can work with the existing fabric. Not just retain the religious structures and the listed structures, but actually, if need be, look to recreate the urban grain that is there. Widen some of the roads, but put back, the Seaward is the Seaward, and Mumbai is the Seaward because of the nature of the street and the buildings that front the street and the activities in those buildings. Personally, I don't think you should sweep all that away. So we did a number of generic studies to show how we could keep that and still perhaps develop a tall building and still put some car parking in. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, but you can perhaps get an idea through some of these. Every scheme is retaining the perimeter of the site, or at least the concept of the perimeter of the site. Okay, so this is interesting. So we did all this, we got back to Chicago, and then it was right guys, you're all ready to design your tall building. Get on with it. And look what they created. And I think this epitomizes what's kind of wrong with architecture. Each student went out and designed their own high-rise icon and created a zoo, an architectural zoo, a menagerie that had even the brief, required a vision together, and it did not have that vision. So we stepped back from that. We stepped back and we started to develop a common architectural framework, started to explore how these buildings could relate to each other, and you can see a development here. Eventually to this, and this was an interesting breakthrough. In this scheme here, we started to look at the relationship between the towers, at the base, at the urban grain, but also slipping past each other for views and wind and access to other things. And then this tower, you can see what we tried to do here was, as a concept, was bring the scale of the city block, the scale of the seaward into each horizon of the building, just as a concept. You can see that there. Villages, horizon villages. And then we started to superimpose on this what I call agenda. This is the final model, but I want to talk a little bit about agenda. So there were 5 towers. Each of these 5 towers had an agenda. This one was about, and most of them were sensible residential towers, but had these additional agendas. This was about food. And the students went away and did research of, as the city intensifies, as it gets bigger, we rely on ever more agricultural land to support our existence in cities. Not only that, but then we import food and the consequential food miles and the energy involved in food miles from all around the world. They did a study which showed that a cabbage comes from Pune, 119 miles away, but an apple comes from the USA, I can't read it, 19,000 miles away. So energy implications, loss of agricultural land. And so they developed this system of, not developed, it's been done around the world, but looked at hydroponics. You don't want soil in tall buildings. Hydroponics, growing vegetables in the building. So this became a sensible residential building, but the people who live there actually have access to a high-rise allotment, a place to grow vegetables, not only to sustain themselves, but actually as a business to sell back to the city. That was one layer. So you can see at the bottom end here, this was the vertical farm element, which was broken into horizons. Fish farming, various other things up there. And then in addition to that, we had these gardens, these communal spaces up in the air. And this public green elevator. You're going to hear Ken Yang talk tomorrow about his work. And a lot of Ken Yang's work is about continual greenery. Continual greenery for eco-corridors that have taken people up to this great park in the sky. Second scheme. Some of the students really engaged with the issue of waste in Mumbai, a major problem. Waste in a large part of the seaward is just thrown out of the window. However, but there's a whole industry that's built up around, and we were in Dharavi slum the other day, and there's a whole section of Dharavi that is just concentrated to recycling of materials. There is an industry that has grown up around it. So these students did lots of studies and looked to incorporate that waste into their building. So again, in the same way that we have the vertical farm community for the residents that live there, here we had a kind of recycling waste center within not only that building, but the whole complex that was created. And then using some of those materials, so the building actually had a skin of bamboo on the outside, sliding bamboo. Recycled materials. I'm speeding up because I'm going to get the bell in a minute. Education. If we're going to create cities in the sky, then all aspects of the cities need to go up there. Residential, office, hotel. I just described 99% of tall buildings. Why is that? That's not a true vibrant city. So this tower actually was a residential tower and also a school. Lack of school facilities in the seaward. And to the north there, you can see the residential part, and then this was a school based around these 3-4-story atrium. Basketball court. Water tower, which looked to not only water as a resource, a valuable resource, but also the Indian culture of bathing and the importance of water in the psyche of the nation. I'm speeding up because I want to show you this last one, which was my favorite, the Swadeshi Tower. And these guys went and spent some time in the Dhobi Ghats. For people overseas, the Dhobi Ghats are huge areas where I think something like 90% of the clothes and fabric in Mumbai is laundered through these communal clothes areas. Well, do we knock all this down? If we knock all this down, then everybody just gets a washing machine and everybody's happy. But is that the right way for India? So these students look to create this in the sky. Ringing bell. Whose idea was that? Whose idea was the bell? And also the very Asian. You go to Hong Kong and sometimes you think the towers are made of clothes because everyone's drying their clothes outside there. Is that such a bad thing? No. Conceptual image. And this was a fantastic scheme, really, which looked to embrace that, not only for the inhabitants, but as a business. As a business. You know, Charles Correa said, or somebody said yesterday, you put someone on the second floor of a high-rise building, you kill them. If they have a little business at the ground floor, you put them on the second floor, not the 82nd, you put them on the second floor, you kill them. So how can we get the business and everything else up in the sky? So that's what that scheme was doing. And there was lots of other great things going on, which I haven't got time to tell you about. Some of the spaces that we created, the residential planning, all naturally ventilated. The Dobie Ghats, the communal Dobie Ghats, which spread out along the Skybridge routes. And then the Skybridges themselves work with this idea of yatra, of procession in India. And these students studied all the different festivals, and I almost finished. So this was what we created in the end. And then this fantastic park in the sky. And, you know, some of you will be aware that their scheme very similar to this is almost complete in Singapore now by Moshi Safdie Architects with IADAS as executive architects. 3 towers linked with a huge sky park. So to everyone who's sat in the audience thinking I'm crazy, we're crazy, and this is far too utopian a vision, it's not. It's really not. But it requires vision. But please do not be under any misapprehension. We created a cluster. We've heard that word used today, cluster. I think we really did create a cluster. But it's not even that in itself is not meant to be an isolated cluster. It's the start of something in the city, and that bottom diagram shows that. It's the start, but even in itself it would be a dead end if it was just 5 towers. It's meant to be a kind of duplication and intensification of the city at the higher levels. And I want to finish with what I tell my students when they're designing projects. 8 design principles for future tall buildings, and this is what I passionately believe in. I believe that tall buildings need to vary with height. They shouldn't just be vertical extrusions of an efficient floor plan, the commercial model. They need to vary with height. You know, the Burj Dubai is 10 degrees cooler at the top than the bottom. You know, tall buildings are developed, they're designed at the ground floor, but every horizon of the city is completely different. Varying texture and scale is essential. I almost feel that a tall building should be designed as several small buildings placed on top of each other, with harmony, not just as a single piece of sculpture. New functions. Office, residential, hotel, not enough. Bring the city into the buildings. Communal, open, recreational space, vital. I think it's completely ridiculous that we're still building all glass towers, especially in the desert, but you know, in lots of other places as well. And then going to gymnastics to actually control the sun with stuff on the outside to solve the problem that we created in the first place. Glass is vital, but we don't have to build it all out of glass. Organic material and vegetation needs to come into the material, into the palette. More connections, and the sky bridges are as much about a philosophical connection as a physical one, because it'll start to break down architectural ego when architects need to work together with a 3D urban vision. And all aspects of the city need to come up into the sky. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Would you please give them a big hand once more?